Okay, hello everyone. Spring has arrived, although the snow yesterday reminds us that weather in Southwest Ontario is unpredictable. Glad you could join us wherever you live and whatever weather you are facing. This is the April webinar of 2025, hosted by the Essex County branch of Ontario Ancestors, which now houses the Franco-Ontarian Research Centre. My name is Linda Urquhart, and I'm sorry I couldn't turn my camera on. I just got a new computer and I haven't figured out how to get that working. Cindy Robichaud will be monitoring the questions. Okay. So before we start, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which the County of Essex is located is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, which include the Huron or Wendat or Wyandot bands. As family historians, we have all answered the call to discover those who came before us, to share their names, to tell their stories, to remember them. No matter how difficult the history is, it needs to be shared so we can all learn and do better and be supporters of our local Indigenous communities. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded and will be added to the Essex County Branch YouTube channel. Also, at this meeting, everyone is muted and your camera is turned off during the presentation. Questions will be answered following the presentation. Just post your questions in the chat box as we go along. The chat box can be found by hovering your mouse at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see that little chat sign there. You click on that and you can put in your questions. Now, there are many ways you can connect with us. We're one of 35 branches and special interest groups of the Ontario Genealogical Society, also known as Ontario Ancestors. At the top of this slide is the link to the main Ontario Ancestors website, where you can find a great deal of data about the Society, as well as educational information and resources to assist you in your research. The Essex County branch website gives you access to many of the digitized collections of the Essex County Library collection, which we began digitizing probably almost 10 years ago. But you also can get access to the newly acquired Franco-Ontarian Research Centre Library, which we just started digitizing about a year ago. Now you can email us at either email address. The second one goes directly to the Franco-Ontarian Research Centre. You can watch past webinars on our YouTube channel, and please join our Facebook group and share or ask questions about your family history research. And also follow us on Instagram to keep in touch. You can visit us at the two locations where our resources are located. The Windsor Public Library Local Histories branch on Sandwich Street, across from the historic St. John's Church, houses the Essex County Branch Library Collection. It is open Monday and Wednesday from noon to 8 p.m. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. But please note that they do close for an hour each day for lunch or dinner breaks, and they are not open on Sundays. The Franco-Ontarian Research Centre on Prince Road houses our newly acquired amazing French research resources. It's open every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and the same times on every second Saturday of the month. Here are a few upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. On Thursday, May the 1st at 7 p.m., the Ontario Ancestors presents Brief Formats to Share Family History by Barbara Campbell. You can register for this on the main OGS website. On Thursday, May the 8th at 1 p.m., the Scottish Special Interest Group offers Educational Records and Apprenticeship Indentures by Lorna Kinnaird. You can register for it on the Scottish SIG website. And on 9th of May at 7 p.m., the Kent branch presents Forgotten, the Journals of Isaac Gardner and Early Rondo by Mark Van Ray. And you can register for that on the Kent website. On the 13th of May at 7:30 p.m., the Essex County and Lambton branches of Ontario Ancestors have invited Catherine Lake Hogan to present Just Across the Border. Thousands of people cross the international border between Canada and the United States every day, including our local crossings at Sarnia and Windsor. Catherine will show you what these records contain and why we should all be using them in our family history research. You can register for this webinar on either the Essex or the Lambton branch website. And the Ontario Genealogical Society is hosting a one-day in-person seminar on Saturday, May 31st. The theme for the day is Your Genealogical Legacy, Plan, Prepare, and Share. And it is intended to be a day of education where attendees will learn the basics of how they can plan for their genealogy work to be preserved for future generations. No one likes to think about the end coming, but we know we must be prepared for the eventuality that happens to everyone. Learn from experts about how you can think about your own genealogical legacy and what you can do to ensure that it is not lost when we are no longer here to champion it. And now tonight's presentation is 7 Local Loyalists by Heather Crewe. A United Empire Loyalist cemetery walk last October highlighted the stories of several Loyalist settlers who arrived in Essex County in the 1790s and whose descendants are buried in a small pioneer cemetery in Kingsville. Heather will expand on those stories and share further background information on these 7 loyalists. And just a few words about Heather. Since her retirement in 2017, Heather has had more time to indulge her passion for early Canadian history, particularly Upper Canada's history. In fact, she's currently pursuing an honors degree in history at the University of Windsor. Heather serves as the chair of education and outreach for the local branch of the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada. So with that, I'll ask Heather to go ahead and share her screen.
All right. Well, see if I can get this off. Yes, so far so good. Stop sharing. Doodah. And this one here. Whew, there we go.
Great.
All right. Everyone can see what's on the screen there. Yes, we're good. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your introduction, Linda. And yeah, I see Colleen is here, and she's certainly well aware. She's our tech guru at Bicentennial Branch, and we'd be completely lost and without her expertise. So, all right. Now, Colleen, you can't answer this question, but maybe others can. So, with the flag in the background, what's wrong with this picture? Does anybody? Do you recognize what's wrong with the picture in terms of the flag in the background? Yeah. You may have noticed then that there is no red diagonal cross, which would have been the cross of Ireland. At the time of the American Revolution, they were still fighting under this British flag, also known as the Queen Anne flag. Ireland did not join Great Britain until 1800. So 1800, 1801. So that's when it became the Union Jack, as we're more familiar. As Linda mentioned, the presentation that we're going to be doing this evening got its genesis from a project that the Loyalist branch did last fall, where we found there was one small pioneer era cemetery in downtown Kingsville that contained the remains of second and third generation loyalists. And so we we picked out 7 of the families, and then on during the Migration Fest in October last fall, we were able to tell people who came to the cemetery about the stories of these 7 families. Obviously, as genealogists, you're well aware that there are many more families in this general vicinity who trace their lineage to Loyalists, but these 7 families happen to be represented in the little cemetery just south of Main Street. And so that's how we got here. So let's move on to next slide. We'll try and do this. You can do this. Okay. Why you not move? There we go. All right. Know if our little video thing is kind of blocking the right side of this. It'll be different, I suppose, for each of you. In any event, as I was looking into the families represented in this little cemetery, I found I could categorize them by ethnicity to an extent. And obviously, there were quite a few, 5 families of that 7 who were of German descent. And then there was the Malots, who are French Huguenot, and the Gurdys, who are Irish in their original background. So with the German names, now you're not going to believe me, but suspend belief as genealogists. There's more than one way to spell these names. And so what I've tried to do is to stick as close as possible to what was in all likelihood closer to the original spelling of their names. And the one that kind of might be on the edge of that might be Eiler. I'd be willing to hazard that in the original German it was Eiler, but who's to say? So even though their names get anglicized in today's parlance, I'm going to, for today's purposes, use the probable original spelling. So again, I was looking for commonalities with these families. Here we go. And what I found, obviously, they were here under the banner of Loyalists, but Loyalists is kind of a catch-all term, because at the time of the Revolution, it was pretty black and white. Either you were a patriot or you were clearly a Tory. Kind of, if you're not with us, you're against us sort of mindset. And so there were quite a few families, probably in the thousands if you wanted to extend it, who were in fact pacifists. But because they would not swear allegiance as patriots, then they got lumped in with Loyalists and were persecuted as such. Another common thread I found with them is that certainly all the German families had come to North America not long before the American Revolution. In some case, just a few years. I think the only exception to that was the Alch family had come a little earlier. The Malots, I believe, came a little earlier, and the Gurdys came from Ireland, I believe, in the 1730s or 40s. So they had been here a generation before the outbreak of the conflict. Another commonality is that almost all of them spent time on Grosse Ile. Well, Mr. McKee, was busy stealing land from First Nations, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, that was kind of dodgy. But until the land had actually been officially put under control of the British and then surveyed, they had to sort of bide their time. And in some cases, it was a number of years that they spent time with the Macomb family on Grosse Seal as tenant farmers, or some version thereof. Another common thread would be that even though these families went through some unbelievable experiences, harrowing, life-threatening experiences, somehow they were made of stern stuff. They got through it. Their families survived and even thrived, and their descendants, many of the descendants, continue to live in this area of southwestern Ontario to this very day. Move on. Okay. So on the right-hand side of your screen, I've put a modern map of Germany just for sort of rough reference. But what you see on the left side of the screen is the German duchies that existed until the unification of Germany in the 1870s. And the little red markers on there show where 5 of the families that ultimately became loyalists, where they came from. And you'll see in the more or less in the center, with the 2 markers, you'll see the Duchy of Hessen, or Hesse. And that plays a very important role with a couple of our loyalists that I'll talk about in a minute. But I love geography, so I wanted to know where are these people coming from, and that'll give you at least some idea. As for the next one, when they came to North America, quite a few of them landed in this little quadrant, whether it was Maryland or lower part of Pennsylvania, or the corner of Virginia, sort of up in here. Quite a few of them landed in this general area. The exception is the Gertie family, because they settled a little bit northeast of Pittsburgh, on the Susquehanna River. And so that's what that one's about. Over here on the right-hand side is a map of Canada, as it was once upon a time. And what I want you to notice here is that the province of Quebec, because we hadn't split into Upper and Lower Canada by this stage yet, and Quebec actually digs way down into today's Ohio, and gobbles up quite a bit of Pennsylvania as well. So Quebec was vastly different, and Michigan, Indiana, and here we've got the Upper Peninsula, so Wisconsin, Quebec took in Minnesota, took in an awful lot of territory back in the day. Final thing I wanted to mention here is back on the left-hand side, you have the Appalachian mountain range coming down there like a spine. And the rule was that the colonies could expand up to the foothills of the Appalachians, and that's where it ended. They couldn't go further. The British government had promised this land to the west of the Appalachian Mountains to First Nations for their traditional hunting and other resource activity. And so they would reserve that for them. Now, mind you, they lied. And I think the bigger scheme was that they planned to sell it off to colonists. But anyway, that was the scheme they went through. Was that this was off limits, and that plays an important role in the stories of some of our loyalists. Okay, so let's meet Philip Fuchs. And so he came from the Stuttgart, today's Stuttgart area, and very bravely, he emigrated to Baltimore, but went by way of England, and then they caught a ship heading to the Americas. Took, if you can believe, 14 weeks to get there. I can't even imagine. So he was newly married, and off they go to cross the ocean, the far side of the planet, as far as they were concerned. They settled in Baltimore initially, but as the drums of war got a little louder, he was concerned that Baltimore might find itself in the center of the conflict, and so he decided to move his family inland to southern Pennsylvania, to what's now called Little York. And of course, by now he's got 3 kids. He wasn't alone. And he found other Germans in that same area, including Johannes Weigele. And they became fast friends. Now, another thing they had in common was he was a pacifist and refused to swear allegiance to the Continental Army or have any trucker trade with any kind of conflict. So, as I had mentioned at the outset, he was persecuted as a result. Anyway, they managed to survive the war years, and by 1786, they hear about free land in Quebec. So, thinking back to the map I just showed you, Quebec isn't Quebec now. It's what was Quebec back then, and all you had to do was prove your loyalty, but also make your way to Detroit to lay claim to your 200-acre allotment. So off he goes with Catherine, and there's 7 kids by now, and Weigeles. And I can't even imagine what that cross-country journey would have been over the mountains with carts and oxen, and there wouldn't have been much by way of roads, pretty rough trails at best. And would have been pretty hairy, and with all these little kids as well, because the Weigele family had a whole bunch of little kids too. Anyway, he settled on Grosse Ile with the McCombs as a tenant farmer until the land here on the north shore of Lake Erie was surveyed and ready for settlement. And oddly enough, the Fuchs and the Weigeles were such good buddies, they ended up with properties pretty much across from each other. And where I live now is on Fuchs' original land allotment, and I also found out there was some sort of seasonal First Nations settlement here in this neighborhood too. But it's kind of neat to think that Philip Fuchs would have looked out his cabin window and seen much the same sort of thing that I do, except for the houses. So moving along, more about Mr. Fuchs. He first moved to Petticoat, and he cleared as much as he could of the forest on his original allotment there, and then he moved to where I am now. So right across the creek is where the Weigeles live. But yeah, the Fuchses and the Weigeles and the Kratzes and the Mungers, the Toffelmeyers, they were all pretty close friends. He eventually acquired another two more 200-acre parcels. So you'll find several of our loyalists were quite clever at enlarging their land holdings. The Fuchs family ultimately included 10 children, and by the time you get to the next generation, there are 87 grandchildren, and you'll still find evidence of the descendants of the Fuchs family, and like so many of our loyalists in this grouping, road names and other landmarks that are named after these original loyalists. Sadly, his son George drowned in Lake Erie. He was comparatively young man at 47. Catherine, his wife from back in Germany, died in 1802, and according to what I was able to find, Philip himself died just after the War of 1812 at age 66 in 1815. So let's talk to Johannes. So he was born in Hesse. Now, I think of Johannes a bit like the Artful Dodger in Oliver, because he was orphaned at a young age. He was left to fend for himself. He was very clever, and he made his way in the world. One thing about Hesse, and we'll get to that a little bit more when we talk about Leonard Kratz, is that there was mandatory conscription of young men. So at age 19, I think Johannes looked the situation over, figured, well, I've dodged the bullet so far. It's time to clear out of Dodge. So he made his way to Rotterdam and stowed away on a ship that was bound for England. So far, so good. And then when he got to the harbor in England, he stowed away again. Thought he had a winning formula. And this ship was set to sail to New York. Not so lucky this time. He was discovered and taken to the captain, who, I suppose they could have thrown him overboard, but they didn't. Kept him until they got to New York, and then he was turned in to a factory owner and forced to a 7-year indenture to a woolen factory. So, yeah, that was to pay for his passage. Like I say, this fellow's an artful dodger. He somehow he wiggled out of that, and he shows up a couple years later. Now he's in York, Pennsylvania. I remember we talked about that with the Fuchs family when they moved from Baltimore. And he's married to Juliana Romer. Now, Weigele himself was a member of a kind of an Anabaptist subset called the Dunkards, and we'll talk about them in just a minute or two. But they were pacifist. And so, again, he was under a lot of suspicion of being a loyalist, being a Tory, because he wouldn't agree to fight with the Patriots of the Continental Army. And they came for him. At one point, he even hid under the floorboards of his cabin while they searched for him, and they were even sticking swords down between the floorboards. I mean, absolutely terrifying for him and for his family. Anyway, along with the Fuchs family, Johannes and Juliana and 4 kids, off they went to see if they could claim land as loyalists, quote unquote, in Fort Detroit. So when he got to Detroit, like so many others, he did some tenant farming on Grosse Ile with the Macomb family, or for the Macomb family. And it's believed that he anglicized his name to Weigel while he was there. So let me just, for those of you who are not as familiar maybe with German. So there is no w sound in German. It's a v, obviously. And EI is an I sound, and the G is hard, so it's Weige, and you pronounce every letter pretty much, so it's Weigele. So you can see how he got Weigel out of that. And I believe that happened before he moved to this area, but probably while he was on Grosse Ile. Anyway, yeah, the German contingent, the Tafelmeyers, the Mungers, and the Kratzes, and the Fuchses, and the Violas, they were all pretty good buds, and they were all camped out farming on Grosse Ile. So he was awarded his 200 acres in the new settlement. And he managed to parlay that over the rest of his life into 3,000 acres. So that's pretty impressive. And he and Juliana had 11 children. He died again just after the War of 1812, this time in 1816, or the year with no summer, as they also call it, because of the interference of volcanic ash that was messing up the world's climate in 1816. Crop failures, horrible stuff. Anyway, he died that year at age 63. Juliana survived him by another 8 years and passed away at age 69 in 1824. So I want to talk just a little bit about these Dunkards. So as I say, it was a Protestant sect, part of the Anabaptist, and it was originated in the early 1700s in Germany. So the German settlers who arrived in Pennsylvania brought the religion with them, and they were very diehard pacifists. They opposed war. They opposed oaths and any kind of secret societies. Much like Amish, they wore very plain homespun clothing. Women wore veils in church. The part I thought was kind of an interesting little twist. They only use the New Testament. We don't want any of this Old Testament stuff. They got war, they got slavery, they got divorce, they got vengeance. This doesn't sit well with our belief system and our values. So we only use the New Testament. And the term Dunkard came from the fact that when they were baptized, they would be dunked or immersed 3 times. So that's where that I guess it's kind of a nickname, came from. Now, obviously there were no photos back in the late 1700s, but I thought this might represent to a degree what they would have been going through with their wagons and carts being pulled by probably oxen, because these wagons would have been pretty heavily loaded. And the little photo on the bottom, I think they might be Hutterites, but I wanted to get across the fact that they not only were traveling with carts, but there'd be a whole tassel full of kids with them too. The Weigeles had 4, the Fuchses had 7. I can't even imagine if you've ever been camping with kids. Try and picture what it would have been like to cross these trails that would, heaven help you, if it rained, it would must have been a nightmare to get there before with these conditions until they finally arrived at Fort Detroit. So the okay, are you going to work with me here? Yeah. Right. All right. For some reason, it doesn't want to move. Oh, now we got to back up here. There's A. Okay. So this is a map, and it's taken from the 1976 book, The Deep Roots, which was written by the curator of the museum on Grosse Seal back 50 years now. But what it shows is where the various tenant farmers had their land. And so I've kind of pointed out where the Krotzes, the Malots, the Eilers, and the Fuchs families were. I didn't see the Weigeles on this map, but certainly they were part of it. The Toffelmeyers were in there as well, and the Mungers and the Ferrises. So even though I'm not going to talk about them, they're certainly quite familiar to you, I guarantee. So let's talk about Leonard Krotz. He has such an interesting story. So he was born in near Frankfurt in the Duchy of Hesse, and started his apprenticeship as a weaver, but got conscripted, and the British had this deal going with the state of Hesse, where they would hire their trained soldiers as mercenaries, and they used a lot of them during the Revolutionary War in trying to put down the revolution. So just to describe that a little bit, the state of Hesse had mandatory conscription between the ages of 16 and 30 for all men. And in fact, you had to actually register with the state at age 7. And you could be called up to duty at any point once you turned 16, which is why Johannes Weigele, our artful dodger, he he took off before his number came up. They had quite a distinctive uniform, kind of a cool uniform, you have to admit, very fancy hat. So the state would give them uniforms and also train them, and it was a very strict military training, and there was a lot of corporal punishment. If you made even a minor misdemeanor, you could be flogged or worse. Certainly deserters were executed without even a second thought. But anyway, the British royalty, so we're talking about George III at this point, they were related distantly to the wasn't really monarchy, but the well-to-do dukes who ran Hesse. They were related, bearing in mind George would, of course, been a Hanoverian German. And so they had this kind of in-family thing where they would hire these Hessian soldiers who were being conscripted and trained and then rented out. And so evidently there were 36,000 of these mercenaries who were hired by Britain during the American Revolution. So for the state of Hesse, this was a pretty good revenue stream. And yeah, so at the time, Hesse was ruled by Landgraf Wilhelm. So a graf is like a count, I guess is the closest I can come up to, would be Count Wilhelm. And he was, as I say, related to the Hanoverian line in Britain at the time. So anyway, back to Leonard. So off they load them onto boats and away they go to New York. And he was with the Hanau Regiment. He fought under General Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga, but was captured and sent to the POW camp the Continental Army had in Virginia. And so he got to know that territory fairly well too, which is important. Okay. Now, remember I said that the British had forbidden the colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains because it was reserved for First Nations hunting and so forth and so on. But settlers from Pennsylvania and Virginia were absolutely pouring over the mountains, looking for free land in Kentucky. So, after he escaped from the POW camp in Virginia, Leonard sets himself up as a trail guide for Pennsylvania settlers. And along the way, he met and fell in love with Mary Munger. While they were on their way, he was taking them to what would be their new land in Kentucky, sort of as squatters. Her family did not take kindly to him. And he asked her again, and he asked permission of her parents, and the father said, absolutely not. So Leonard put his foot down, said, fine, we're out here in the middle of the bush, somewhere between Pennsylvania and Kentucky, and you don't know where you're going. I do. So here's the deal. Either you agree to this, or we're staying put. And I'll head back to Virginia, and good luck to you. So since you put it that way, they did reluctantly agree. And so Leonard and Mary did get married, and they did arrive in Kentucky, and they had started to clear land and to set up a farm in Kentucky. But unfortunately, they weren't there very long before the British came with a battalion from Detroit, and they were there to enforce this rule that there would be no settlement in that area, which had been set aside for First Nations. Apparently, Simon Girty led 600 First Nations warriors in this attack too, from what I was able to find out. But anyway, this was the attack at Ruddles, Lieutenant Ruddles Station. So even though they huddled in the little fort, the First Nations warriors did manage to break through. And so they grabbed, of those that survived, they grabbed these would-be settlers and took them prisoner, which was quite common. And for First Nations, they had a couple options. They could either keep them as slaves themselves, or they could get them ransomed off for goods or guns or whatever else they felt they needed. So they had a few options. This was kind of currency exchange, if you will. These prisoners were valuable. Anyway, they were all forced to walk to Fort Detroit. And because Kratz had been Hessian soldier, the British did pay his ransom, and he was quite battered down. The First Nations, the one who actually owned him, had forced him to carry this huge copper kettle on his back. And even when he slept, he had to sleep with this thing strapped to him. And so it left permanent injuries. Also, this same warrior would not feed him. It was only that one of the women, I guess, who was traveling with the group of warriors that captured him would sneak him food. But he was half starved, and his back was in terrible shape, scarred. He was in pretty rough shape. But anyway, the British did nurse him back to health. Now, as for Mary, his wife, they had gotten separated, and she was with another group of the women. They had an infant son, but unfortunately, on the way, she had fallen, and the baby's head hit a tree root, and so did unfortunately did not survive. Uh, when Kratz kept looking for Mary, and he was there a while before finally he saw the women arrive, but his wife was so emaciated, he didn't even recognize her. She had to go up to him and, Leonard, don't you recognize me? She was also in very bad shape. Anyway, once they were reunited, they did settle on Belle Isle or Hog Island, but the local natives were attacking, and so it became a little too dangerous to try and stay there. So they headed back to Fort Detroit for safety. Now, Kratz was afraid because of the strict rules the Hessian soldiers were under. He was afraid that his imprisonment, his years of imprisonment, would count as a desertion. So if he ever did meet up, they could execute him. And so he wanted to set the record straight. And he was able to rejoin his unit in Quebec, but I'm not sure where in Quebec, bearing in mind how large Quebec was at that point, in 1783. And the unit did take him back to Hesse. So he was able to get the paperwork sorted out and then return to his family in North America. But it took a while. I think it was 1785 before he was able to make his way back. He appears on muster roll for Butler's Rangers as well. But finally, in 1785, he was able to reunite with Mary. So for a while, until the mid 1790s before the land here on the north shore of Lake Erie was surveyed. So until then, they farmed on Gros Seal, and he met up with the Weigelas and the Fuchses and the Toffelmeyers and the Malots, and they all became close buddies while they were farming on Gros Seal. So Kratz was awarded 200 acres here in South Gosfield. And of the 11 children that he and Mary had, 9 of them survived to adulthood. Leonard himself died in 1829, and there was a favorite spot on his property where he could sit and look out over the lake, and that's where he asked to be buried. Sadly, there was one of those huge storms Lake Erie's so famous for that washed out his grave, and so he was washed out into the lake, and so he has no burial place that we can identify. Okay, so the Eilers. Now this they have kind of an interesting history. So they came from Dillich, Germany. Somewhere is a little town between Frankfurt and Hanover. And so that family emigrated to America in the early 1700s, 1729 or thereabout. And the original Eilers, a couple generations later, their grandson, Valentine, was born in 1745. And we found him living in Maryland with his wife, Susanna. The Eilers were also members of this Dunkard sect. And in the book, The Deep Roots, I found reference to Jacob, who is Valentine's son. Valentine and his wife, Susanna, they left in the 1790s. There was a whole bunch of the pacifists who decided not to, like I say, they didn't like oaths, these Dunkards. So they refused to swear an oath of allegiance to the crown. So they weren't awarded land. So a whole bunch of them left in 1792 and stayed in the States. So Valentine and Susanna, the next time we see them, they're in the Dayton, Ohio area. But Jacob, stayed in this area and married Elizabeth Snyder. They had 10 children and settled near Colchester. Now, I did find in Deep Roots reference to Jacob Eiler being put in jail for some sort of a skirmish about dispute about paying rent while he was on gross seal. So I'm not sure if that was a little tiff he got into with the McCombs, but in any event, because he refused to pay rent, he was put in the clinker for a little while. But anyway, he did get that resolved and eventually was able to get a land grant in the Gosfield area here in Colchester. So if you are, and I'm sure you are, you're all history buffs, know where the John R. Park homestead is on Heritage Road at the base of, I think it's Eiler Road is right there. Then just to the east of where the John R. Park is Twin Gables Road, and that's where you'll find remnants of the Eiler settlement and some of the original headstones of some of the descendants of Jacob. So anyway, worth a look if you haven't seen it already. Sometime you're on that stretch of Heritage Road, then make a little detour and check out the Eiler family settlement site. Okay, then we get to Andreas Ulch. So he was actually born in North America, near Harrisburg, and his father. So he was second generation. His father had come from Saxony earlier in the 1700s, somewhere around 1730. And while he was in Pennsylvania, he was trained to be a miller. So when he made his way to Fort Detroit, we're not sure how he got there, if he went on his own or if he was captured by the First Nations. That's probably the more likely. So Macomb, as he often did, would pay the ransom in return for which he would have to serve time as a tenant farmer. So the first parcel of land he got as a loyalist, he gave back because didn't really give a reason. My hunch, knowing the geography of this area as being quite swampy, it probably was a little too wet to do any serious farming. So he gave back and pulled another lot or petitioned another lot. Because he was a miller, he was given primo territory on Mill Creek, but his mission then was to build and operate a grist mill, which was such an important function in these early settlements. It was one thing to be able to clear land and grow grain, but you can't consume it like that. It has to be milled. And until that point, any of the grain grown in the new settlement had to be taken by water to Detroit to be milled. So that's a long way. Very, very important to be able to mill your grain a little closer to home. And so that was Andreas Ulch. And of course, Andreas, as the first miller, he gets special mention in the plaque that the Bicentennial branch put up at the town square in Kingsville, right by the clock at the corner of Main and Division. So it kind of looks like this. So make a point next time you're in Kingsville to look for the plaque. And as I say, you'll see special mention. Now, again, genealogists, you know all about this, how the names change. So there he's listed as Alcock, but also Ulch, ULCH, but originally it would have been ULTSCH. So yeah, he gets special credit for opening a grist mill or operating a grist mill. Okay, then we come to the Malots, who evidently were Huguenots originally. So the father, Peter, was born in New Jersey in 1727 and married at age 20, Sarah Tracy in Maryland. So they decide to try their luck at resettling in Kentucky. And then we get into the issue of George Washington. So although the British had set this land aside, I don't know. Historians may argue with me, but in my estimation, this was the cause, or one of the primary causes of the revolution, was Washington and his brothers knew full well what was on the other side of the mountains. Washington was trained as a surveyor and had surveyed that part of Virginia on the far side of the Appalachians, and no dummy. He and his brothers knew there was potential for selling this land, so laying claim to it, and then selling it to the colonists who were getting a little crowded on the east side of the mountains. And but Britain was standing in their way. So I don't know. Yes, there were a lot of causes to the of the American Revolution, but if you peel back the layers far enough, um, don't be too shocked if you find that there was money at the heart of it, and money in land speculation. But anyway, so back to Peter Malott. He and their 6 kids, they decide to resettle in Kentucky. So this area that had been set aside that nobody was supposed to settle on, off they went. And so they loaded up their worldly belongings and headed off in flat boats along the Ohio River. And unfortunately, they were attacked by Delaware warriors. And Sarah and the kids, by then there were 14 kids. I can't even imagine trying to travel under those circumstances with 14 kids. Some were already adults. So the oldest was 27 at this point, but the youngest was only 2. So the kids and Sarah were taken captive. Peter Sr. assumed they had all been killed. They got separated. He goes back to the old homestead in Maryland, remarries Rachel, somebody, and starts a whole new family. Sarah and the kids, however, eventually end up in Fort Detroit, and Macomb again ransomed them. The accounts in Deep Roots about Groseal refer to her as widow Malott. So she also assumed that Peter had been killed. Anyway, all of the kids were with her except one, the eldest daughter, Catherine, who was about 15 when she was taken captive, and they kept her. So eventually, Sarah managed to meet up with Simon Girty, who, of course, was very fluent in several of the native languages. And so she hired him to try and find Catherine. So I guess he was pretty clever, and through his network of contacts, managed to find her. and brought her back, reunited her with the family. But on the way back to Detroit, even though there was a at least 22, I've also read 24-year age difference between them, they did fall in love and marry. By that time, Catherine was 19. Um, the name that the First Nations gave her translates to white dove, and she was said to be the most beautiful woman in all of Detroit. And they settled in Amherstburg, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the uh, trunk, uh, the grave marker in the shape of a tree trunk that marks where the Gertie homestead was. So they had 4 children. Uh, Simon must have been extremely difficult to live with. And so we'll get to him momentarily. So they did split up, but they did have 4 children together. Now, Peter, he went back to try and find his father and found his father in Maryland, in the old homestead, and had started a new family. So Peter came back to Upper Canada, and he married Polly Jones, who was working. She had also been captured by the natives and was at that point working as a house servant in the Macomb household. So anyway, they married and had 4 children. Really tragically, Peter apparently died when he fell into a vat of boiling cider, which sounds like a terrible, terrible, horrific way to go. But so that left Polly um, widowed with all these little kids. So, and Sarah herself died in 1796, and I haven't yet found where her final resting place is, but we'll keep looking. Some of you may know where she's buried. Anyway, so that's the story of the Malott. And then we come to Simon Gertie, who was born but northeast of Pittsburgh on the Susquehanna. And horrific story with him as well. His father was killed by a native man, and in turn, that man was killed by John Turner. So then Simon's mother married the man who killed her uh, husband's murderer. Anyway, Turner moves the family into Fort Granville for safety from attack by the warriors. But the fort itself was overrun, and they remembered that he was the one that killed the one who killed Simon's father, and so the stepfather was tortured and murdered. And so Simon and his 2 brothers were then held captive by the Shawnee and Delaware. Um, and at that point, Simon was 15. They sold him to the Seneca. So while he was with them, he learned to speak at least 9 indigenous languages. And not surprisingly, when they finally released him, he became an Indian agent, very useful. At one point in time, he also served as an aide to Joseph Brant or Tyendinaga. Sometimes they got into tiff too. But with his familiarity with so many of the dialects and indigenous languages, he was extremely useful and was often able to intervene and advocate for captives and able to get their release, particularly soldiers who'd been captured by the warriors. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to talk them out of murdering Captain Crawford, and Gertie knew him well, knew Crawford well. They were friends. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to save his life. So there's a lot of controversy about that. Should he have done more? It's hard to say. Um, He also knew that the plan that the Continental Army leaders had in mind was to take that native land in Ohio territories. So he switched sides and urged his contacts among the First Nations to ally with the British. So he spends most of his time during the Revolutionary years in that Ohio Valley, Detroit area. Gonna, whoop, wait a minute, back up. And yeah, so that's Simon Gertie. As I say, considering the trauma that the man had been through as a child, and it's hard to imagine the things that that man saw. He became an alcoholic, and by the turn of the century, his health was failing. He had a broken ankle that never really healed. He was feeling the effects of his alcoholism. He was losing his sight. And when the War of 1812 broke out, he was evacuated by some friends to Burlington, to the refugee camp there by Dundurn Castle, because they knew that he had a price on his head. And when the Americans invaded, he'd have been a goner. So they did help by relocating him, at least for the duration of the war. So he did come home in 1815, but he was in terrible shape by then and completely blind. Catherine did come back and cared for him during those final years. He and Catherine had 4 children, and he's buried on the homestead. Catherine herself died in 1852, so she lived a long and healthy life. So that's Simon Gertie, and there are entire bookshelves written on Mr. Gertie. Okay, I thought this was kind of fun, because as I was kind of going down the bunny trail on the friendship among the especially the German um, loyalists and uh, their children, the intermarriages of their children. So I thought I'll just kind of put a little plot together of how the Fuchs and the Kratz and the Weigelas intermarried. And it became a story of 7 brides for 7 brothers. Pretty crazy. And you'll see other names in there, the Malots and the Toffelmeyers. Um, so again, very familiar names to those of you who are doing genealogy with the families in this area. But I thought it was kind of interesting how much crisscross there was there. And we're drawing to a close here. So obviously there were no photos from the time, but I thought this photo from probably circa 1900, give or take, with the kids and the adults and everybody pitching in together to do the work on the farm sort of epitomized the spirit of cooperation and the hardship that these families endured to make a go of it here in Upper Canada in those early years. And I'll leave you with a photo of some of us from the Bicentennial Ranch from our cemetery walk last October. And just to mention, we do meet 4 times a year in March, May, September, and November. Of late, we've been meeting at the Grovedale, the new function hall in Kingsville that overlooks the lake. And if you were interested, we would love to see you as a guest. We'll be meeting in May. You can find information on the UELAC/bicentennial -UEL site. And yeah, so with that, I'll bring it to a close. And if you have questions, I see some chats with some questions. So let's see what we can do. If I don't know the answer, I'll try and make up something plausible. So, all right. So, Cindy, are you okay if I go ahead and try to address the questions, or how
Sure.
would you like to proceed?
Yep, sure. And you can just leave that last screen up so people, if they're
Okay.
interested, they can jot down that UE, that
The
website for
the
you.
URL. Okay.
URL, the UEL URL.
UEL URL. Say that
It's a
fast 3
mouthful.
times. It'll bite your
So
tongue.
I realized that people could not actually put into the chat box to everyone. So
Mm,
they were commenting to me and I was trying to copy and paste things in. So hopefully everybody was able to see the comments that people were saying. There's a lot of interconnections. Doreen, for one, like I believe she descends from every single person that you mentioned tonight. So,
there you go.
that was awesome.
Uh,
And Deborah says, thanks for the great history lesson. It was a good presentation. Thank you so much. I don't know if there was really any questions per se, just more
okay.
comments as we went along. I think people have their own ancestors that were, a part of this whole time frame. So they were sharing, who they were connected to. So that was wonderful to see.
Okay.
I
Well,
had
thank you all for the very kind words.
hi, hi, it's Linda. It's Linda here. I have a question. I just wondered, did the German families retain their language and their culture for any length of time once they were over here? I mean, they had such a weird kind of life being taken prisoners by different groups. So maybe that was hard to do, but you often wonder whether or not they held on to those cultures and that
To say
language.
my just a wild guess, and some of you may be privy to family records, since obviously there are descendants among us here who may have access to primary sources and diaries or records going back a ways to answer that question better than I could. But I would say the first generation who some of them traveled together, some of them met each other on Grosse Seal. I would say it's a pretty safe bet that they would have used German as their first language, and probably spoke to the kids in German as well. Uh, Beyond second and third generations, it's tougher to retain the original tongue unless you have formalized classes, or unless the family sticks to speaking the original language. Otherwise, you become assimilated, and your friends at school and people in your social circle are going to be speaking English. So it's more of a concerted effort to try and keep it up. But certainly, I think it would be fairly safe. The first generation would almost certainly have spoken German to each other, and probably to their kids. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know. Probably lesser so as time went on. But again, if you have access through your family records to primary sources, you might be fortunate enough to find an old diary that references that. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Linda?
Well, I just was thinking about the my husband's family comes from the French side. So the language was lost in his family. And yet I've met many people since we've merged with the Franco-Ontarian Research Center that still speak French in their homes. And they've sent their children to schools where it's taught in French. So they've held on to it for generations,
Right.
and just wondered if, but that's a different situation. The whole province of Quebec, and was all French speaking at one time. So it wasn't that it was just a few
Right.
people. It wasn't a lot of German people. I assumed all the German people that came that were loyalists were part of the Hessen army.
No,
Uh, so
no, they
that's
weren't.
something new.
Yeah, the only, well, there may be others. I'm only highlighting 7 families, and obviously there are more. Um, but uh, Kratz was the only Hessian that I've come across so far, but there certainly could have been more. The other thing just crossed my mind, Linda, would be that if they were able to set up any kind of community worship, since so many of them were Dunkards, then those services, worship services, would have been conducted in German, much like the local Mennonites have their services in German. So that might have been another tie that kept the language alive to a degree. I don't know, just a thought. Good question, though.
Okay, so do you find any other questions, Cindy?
Just one. So you mentioned the cemetery walk from October 2024. Is there one planned for this year? Did I miss that? Did you talk about that or no?
No, haven't really put any effort into repeating it. That I'm getting questions from the branch. Well, you're going to. My watchword is always the reward for good work is more work. So don't know about that. But what I can tell you we are working on that might be of interest to the members is a project that's still in the very early stages of research. And that is what we want to do is to put plaques where we're able and get permission, plaques on the final resting place of as many of the loyalists, the original loyalists in Essex, Chatham, Kent, as we're able to verify. And it gets a bit complicated because not only do you have to figure out the who, but also where they were buried. And then in many, many cases, they will have been buried on the family farms, which in the interim, since the early 1800s, will have changed hands in many cases. So do the new owners, are they okay with that? If it's a larger municipally owned or privately owned cemetery, then obviously you need permission from those authorities too. But what we would like to do is to, if at all possible, acknowledge their final resting places. And so that's a project that is only in the early stages with some help from Deborah Honor. I'm compiling a list of the original loyalists to this area. And then from there, it'll take shape. But yeah, I'm still in very early stages, but it'll keep me busy for a while. So that's another little project. As for a cemetery walk, I'll have to think about it. It was very labor intensive to get that pulled together. If we used the same families in the same site, it wouldn't be as much work this year, but we'll see. If so, what we'd try, I think it was a good idea to try and coincide with Migration Fest in October because you get a lot of visitors to the town, and the town was very generous in enabling me to advertise at some of their events that weekend to let people know about the cemetery walk, and it was pretty well attended. We had a lot of interesting questions and people like yourselves who have relatives who fall into the category of these 7 families who shared their stories. So we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, that's great. And what better time to go for a walk through a cemetery than October?
Yes. Oh, and it was just a picture perfect day, as you can see from the photo.
Awesome.
It was absolutely perfect.
That's great. Yeah, lots of thank yous and lots of it was a wonderful presentation. You actually, as Linda just said there, taught a few things a little bit about history. So that was, I think, one of your goals tonight too, and you achieved it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Yes, I always think it's useful when you're looking at any kind of genealogical stories, to put it in the context of the history of the time and the geography of the time as well. The stories start to make a lot more sense in that way. So again, my pleasure to have been able to share with you some of the things I found out about 7 of the local families, and the work continues. But thank you very much for allowing me to share the stories with you.
Thank you. Linda, do you want to wrap it up?
Do you want me
You
to unshare?
It doesn't matter. We don't have anything else to share, but Linda, your
Okay.
mic's muted. I don't know if you realize that. Well, maybe Linda's having some technical
Linda's
difficulties.
muted. Linda's
she is-
muted at the
She
moment.
is muted.
She's a mute.
Here she goes.
Here she is. There we go.
It's very uncharacteristic for me to be muted. Let me just tell you that right off the bat. But anyway, I was muted. So I do want to thank Heather for her presentation. It was outstanding. It really was an enjoyable presentation. I have a whole ton of questions that I'm going to be sending you.
Oh, good.
Concerning being a UEL descendant, all that kind of stuff. So,
Okay.
but I do know that what you've given us has really taught us a lot about the local history, and it's going to give family researchers like ourselves more encouragement to dig deep into the ancestor stories. So for everybody else, we'll see you in May. Hopefully you'll come to see that about these cross-border people and what kind of records that we can get from them and how good they would be to help us with our own research. Till then, we'll see you in May. And good night, everybody. Thank you again, Heather. Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.